So we're now going to look at the pattern and understand how that translates onto what you're going to cross stitch onto the fabric. Now, one of the first things to understand is that you're not going to be stitching on a printed fabric. A lot of people are really quite alarmed when they realise that they're going to get a pattern on a piece of paper and a completely blank piece of fabric. This is what you do for counted cross stitch, which is what we're doing here. You can get stamped cross stitch where you buy a kit and the pattern is printed onto the fabric. And a lot of people have done a little tapestry kit or something like that. And they can feel that it's a bit less intimidating if you've got the pattern printed on the fabric and you just stitch over where the colours are. But I promise you, it is not scary stitching on a plain piece of fabric. It really is very simple. And once you get the hang of it, I find that it's much easier than stitching on stamped fabric, because what I always found with stamped kits is that the colours didn't exactly go over where the squares were. So you just didn't know where to put certain stitches. You never have that problem with the pattern and the blank fabric, because the pattern shows you precisely where to put every stitch. It also means you can do really detailed patterns that you just wouldn't be able to translate that sort of level of colour gradation onto the stamped fabric. So please don't be alarmed by the plain fabric. You don't need to print the pattern onto the fabric or have any fancy equipment. Just print the pattern onto paper with a normal printer. So this is our pattern. A comment on patterns, they are all copyrighted to the person who designed them, and you shouldn't show the pattern itself in photos or videos on social media or elsewhere, because you'll be breaking that copyright. This is my pattern that I've designed for this tutorial series, so I am going to show the pattern freely in these videos, but I just wanted to explain that that is not the norm and not something that should usually be done. So this is the front page of the pattern, which has the title, the name of the designer, which is me, and the picture of what your finished piece will look like. The next page shows the cross stitch pattern itself. Now, I do two versions of all my patterns. You can have the pattern in colour blocks with symbols, or the pattern in just black and white symbols. So these patterns are exactly the same. The two versions are completely the same. The only difference is this colouring of where you're going to stitch. Which one you want to use is totally personal preference. Some people always want to use the colour patterns. Some people always want to use the black and white patterns. Just go with what you're more comfortable with. I personally tend to stitch with black and white patterns because I actually like that you can easily shade off where you're stitching with a pencil. Other people find sort of the grid of black and white symbols more daunting and prefer to have the colour. So let's go with what you're happy with. So this pattern, you can see, I'm going to see how the pattern is made up. So you've got a grid of squares, and each square is going to be filled with a symbol if it's stitched on. So we're not going to stitch on the entire area of the fabric, as you can see in the cover page here. These white areas are unstitched. You get cross-stitch pieces where you stitch the entire piece. They're called full coverage. But many others you don't. You leave the fabric showing around the image that you're stitching. So every square that has a stitch in it has a symbol on it. And in the colour pattern, it has the colour that goes with the symbol. So that tells you the colour that you're going to stitch in that square. On the final page of the pattern, we have a colour key. So this is all the details for the pattern. I'll go through what it tells you. It tells you the size of the pattern in stitches. That doesn't include any border area of the fabric. You obviously need to have some sort of level of fabric around your design. And you'd have more border than this in order to frame it. But this tells you the size of the stitched area so that you can then add on a border and work out how much fabric size you'll need, and we'll do more of that in another video. It then tells you the size on 14 count fabric. Again, we'll go over that in the next video. It then tells you the symbols. This is a list of the colours needed for the threads. DMC is a brand of cotton embroidery thread. Other brands are available, but it is become the most standard used brand, and it is the one I use for all my patterns and the one that the majority of designers currently use. So this tells you the threads you need to buy. There are 8 of them, and you choose them by number. If you go onto a stitching shop website, you'll be able to go to DMC stranded cotton and pick each number to go in your basket. White doesn't have a number for some reason that I've never quite understood. It's called Blanc, and then the others have the number. This colour description tells you what colour it is. The colour descriptions do vary from designer to designer. So if you see, or perhaps on the website you're buying on, it has a slightly different name for the colour, that's fine, so long as you're getting the right number. I just include the colour description to give you a guidance on what colour. You know, if it says red and you're buying green thread, then you've probably got the pattern number wrong. This shows you the back stitch. The lines on this pattern, you can see there are lines around the outside of the dragon, and there are lines here showing the text. That will be in back stitch, which we will cover in a future video. The dots here are French knots that we will also cover. And then I have the copyright text at the end. So we know now from the pattern, we'll be able to work out what size Aida we need to buy, which we'll do in the next video. We know what threads we need to get, which is these 8 threads, because we've got the DMC colours listed. And if we look at the fabric, have a close look at this fabric, because it's really worth looking at your Aida fabric once you've got it, and just having that really good understanding of how it works and what it's made up of. So you can see that the fabric is made up of each of these little squares. You see there's a hole. Look at my needle. So holes in the corner of each square. So I can make here, 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 and here. And there's a little square in the middle. So each square on the pattern that has a symbol in it translates to one of these squares on the Aida. And so it's that simple. You've got the squares laid out for you here, you've got the squares laid out for you here, and so you will just count along to where you need to stitch, which is why it's called counted cross stitch, and then you will stitch according to where the pattern is. The pattern has arrows here which show you the center. They point to the center of the pattern, and we'll show in another video how to work out the center of your fabric and then mark that so that you can start. You've also got numbers here of the major grid lines. You might be able to see here that every 10th line is a bit bolder. That's just to enable you to count, and it counts along here. It's just easier, and you can mark it in the tens. You don't stitch these lines. Some people do pre-grid their fabric for larger patterns, but that's another thing. These lines are just on the pattern as the equivalent of these lines on the Aida as a guidance. So that is the introduction to how the cross stitch patterns work and what it means. And once you start to see that it's not just a very daunting list of symbols, then it all starts to make a bit more sense. We've also got on this pattern these very small symbols in the squares are fractional stitches, and they will be covered in a future video. Don't take any notice of them for now. We are going to concentrate on the big symbols and we'll start stitching with those very soon. But first of all, we will look at the Aida and understand how to decide what Aida to buy and what size we need. See you there.